while never stopping to do everything she could to promote our conservative principles. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you Jessi Blakely.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you for hosting us and for inviting us here, and thank you all for coming. So I want to start out quick. I know Matt mentioned that some of y'all might not be super familiar with the Young Republican National Federation. So just show of hands, who in this room has attended a national deployment, a convention, something like that with the Young Republican National Federation? Okay, so there's a few. So for those of you who haven't, I'm just going to go over a brief history of the organization because not everybody knows this. So the Young Republican National Federation was founded in 1931 by General George Olmsted at the request of Herbert Hoover. And the entire goal of the organization was to recruit young professionals, get them involved in the Republican Party, help recruit Republicans, and essentially help build our base in the next generation. And so we've continued since then. We have local chapters like you guys. Local chapters get their charters from state federations. State federations, I'm sure you guys are familiar, there's some state leaders in this room. And so state federations gather periodically to have conventions, elect their statewide leadership, and those state federations get their charters from the National Federation. And for a lot of folks who are involved in the regular GOP, I usually like to liken it to a similar structure to the RNC. So we have local county party, state party, and then the National Committee. The National Committee from each is made up of 3 representatives from each state. So there's a National Committee man, National Committee woman, and a chair. They represent your state at the national level, and then the National Federation also elects officers every 2 years at the convention, like Matt mentioned. So I'm a candidate for national chair, but candidates for national chair usually build out tickets. So they'll fill positions like executive vice chair, co-chair, state chairman's association chair, who's somebody who's basically elected, who's a current serving state chairman who can manage all the state chairs, kind of talk to them and figure out the best ways to help our states going forward. We also have a regional vice chair position, so they're responsible for the 4 different regions, the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, and the West. You guys are part of the Southern region, which is the best region in YRNF. We also have positions like secretary, treasurer, assistant secretary, assistant treasurer, auditor, all these things. But the goal of the organization is to recruit, train, and elect Republicans. So we recruit people to get involved in the party. We train them how to be effective, whether that is as members who are elected to office, people who are activists in the party, lobbyists, whatever that may be, wherever your space is in the conservative movement. We want to make sure you're well trained to do that. And then elect Republicans, ideally elect young Republicans. That's kind of why we're here. So that's our kind of overview. But for those of you who are involved at the local level, which I think is the most important level of the YRNF, because you guys are actually talking to voters regularly, you're touching candidates, the question is kind of, why does all this national stuff matter? Because odds are, some of you may go to national events, but for the most part, you're going to be doing what you're doing here in Rockwall or Dallas or Texas generally. So, I like to ask the question kind of, why does it matter? So how many people have heard of the Reagan Revolution? I'm sure most people have probably heard of Ronald Reagan, but I don't know if everybody knows how he got there. So when Reagan became our nominee, it's kind of a long process, and it started because the establishment at the time wanted Ford. Ford is our only president in history not to be elected to the office in any way, shape, or form. And the GOP establishment at the time said, Ford's our guy, we want him. The Young Republicans is pretty unique in the national political sphere because, there's a lot of conservative youth organizations out there. There's Turning Point USA, and there's state-based organizations and stuff like that. People are familiar with those. But the Young Republican National Federation is a part of the actual formal Republican Party infrastructure, which gives us a little bit of a unique position. And so, yep, let's do over here. Take a break for a minute if we need to do orders. So the Young Republican National Federation is pretty uniquely positioned because we're a youth organization that's also in the formal Republican Party infrastructure. And one of the unique things about the Reagan Revolution is that it happened because of the YRNF. So all of the party at the time wanted Ford, but the Young Republicans were the first group of people formally within the Republican Party that said, nope, we're going to chart a different course here. And because of that, they organized people around the country, chapters, they chartered a bunch of chapters, recruited a bunch of new members. Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. And what happened was they built up a grassroots effort of young people across the country who said, no, we don't like the way things are going. We want to do something different. And actually, so I'm also a member of the Republican Women's Federation, which is another auxiliary group like the Young Republicans. My club just turned 50 years old this year, which was really cool because I was sitting there with some of our members, some of whom have been there since the club was chartered. And we were going through these old photographs, getting ready for our 50-year anniversary party that we're going to throw. We're going through these photographs and different records and stuff like that, and these older ladies who've been involved in the movement for a long, long time are telling me all these stories of stuff that they did. And we came across this little book. So I was like, oh, what's this? Opened it up, started looking through it. One of the older ladies was like, oh, this was our volunteer logbook. And she was talking about, I live in the 8th District in Virginia, which is super blue. It didn't used to be blue at the time. But she was a young Republican at the time. Now she's in her 70s. She was like, oh, yeah, this was our young women's group that we had. We chartered it with a bunch of young moms who were really interested in fixing the system, getting Reagan elected, changing the way that the Republican Party was. So this is a bulk of our volunteer hours, and what we would do is we would sign up and we would babysit each other's kids so we could all make phone calls to recruit delegates to the 8th District Convention so that Virginia could nominate Reagan. And that was awesome. It was so cool to look at that piece of history. And I think we all kind of know what happened. At the end of the day, Reagan became our nominee. But that revolution in the Republican Party and that change of direction happened because of the Young Republicans and the network that was established and who was able to get involved at that time. And that's created a lasting legacy that really still affects our party today. So a lot of those names you might still recognize as very politically relevant. Some of the people that came out of that time period of the YRNF were people like Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Morton Blackwell, and even Kevin McCarthy, who's kind of the next generation after that, who's YRNF Chairman in 2000. But I think many of the people in this room might feel a little bit hesitant about being super excited about that group of people because their vision failed us. And the direction that the Republican Party has gone since then, it's a little bit disappointing for some people. So I think most of us can probably agree that the country is probably not in a better place now than it was then when they did that. And it was their job to defend against those problems. So I think one of the things that we're facing right now is that it's time to realign the Republican Party with the interests of the base, and to make sure that our Republican Party is one of action and not just talk. But if we're talking about realigning the Republican Party with the interests of the base and promoting men and women of action into positions of leadership, we need to be inviting the voices to the table who are going to be in this country, in our country and in our party, for the next 50 years. Those are the people who need to be charting that course for the future of the Republican Party, not the people who have been here for the last 50 years. And many of them I respect and count as mentors, but we need a long-term vision from the people who it will impact. So I would bet that most of the people in this room are here because you care deeply about the direction of this country. A lot of you probably see what's going on, and you want to chart a different course. You're ready to do that. So congratulations, that's the hardest part. Showing up. It's really, really easy to complain on the internet. It's even easier to live in the pods and eat the bugs, and it's comfortable. It's easy, you don't have to do much. Just sign up to the current thing. Showing up takes a lot of effort. And for a lot of you, and for me, it takes a lot of personal sacrifice to do that. It's hard. So to be blunt, the reason that I'm here talking to you today is because there is nowhere else in the world for me to be but in this fight, on this field, right now. And I know that many of you feel the same way. So I'll talk a little bit about who I am. I don't want to go too much into that, but I'm a true believer in our nation and in our cause. And I have come under consistent attack as I've been involved in politics because I don't change my opinions based on what's popular. I don't change my opinions based on what makes people angry. If I am standing for the truth, I will continue to do so. And I don't really care what attacks come at me, so I've been controversial sometimes. But since I was really young, I knew that I really wanted to be involved in politics. But not in I'm going to be a congressman one day. There's a bunch of people who show up and I'm going to be a congressman. I don't care. I'm not here to get elected to office. That's not why I do this. Politics isn't Republicans and Democrats. I mean, it is that in this country right now in this context, but politics in the West was founded in Athens. The ideas that started in Athens inspired Rome. They were further refined in the English tradition, and they were even more perfected here in the United States at our founding, and that is what I wanted to be a part of. So earlier this spring, I was at CPAC, which was a really, really cool event, and I had the opportunity to speak with a lot of young members of parliament and young party leaders from around the world. And while a lot of them don't understand common law tradition, they're really, really jealous of the results. So I was talking to some of them, and I know that a lot of people in this room, hang on a second, make sure we're good. So a lot of the members of European parliaments that I was talking to, they're part of this Western political tradition. They're jealous of the results of common law. I know a lot of us in this room probably feel like a lot of our rights have been eroded over the past couple decades, and you're right, they have. But your political party hasn't been outlawed yet. I talk to people, serious people, who are members of parliament, who can't campaign. If they find an argument that works with voters, and by the way, most of these right-wing parties are the biggest by membership in their countries. But if they find an argument that works with voters, it is banned. They are threatened with jail time for advertising their campaigns. We're not there yet. And the reason we're not there yet is because of our founding documents. They offer a speed bump. So we have a little bit more time, but we still need to make sure that we have a strong party and a strong national youth movement to prevent us from getting to the place that they are at. So the only reason I've been able to participate in this 2,000-year-old tradition and to be in the room with people like that, to have those conversations and understand the context of where we're at in this country a little bit better, is because of the Young Republicans. I do not come from a political family, had zero political connections, but I knew I wanted to be involved in this. So I got to Virginia, and I started going to local meetings and stuff. But if you guys, most of you have probably had this experience, if you start showing up at Republican events, nobody explains to you what's happening. If you show up to your county party, nobody's gonna tell you how the rules work. So I showed up to a county party one time, and I was like, what's going on? And a gentleman who's now one of my best friends came up to me with a sheet of paper. It was a sign-up form for the YRs. Said, "You look like you're under 40. Congratulations, you're a member of the YRs. Senator Cosgrove is one of our state senators, has paid your dues. Our meeting's on Tuesday. You're coming." And it was the first place where anyone explained to me how to do something that matters. And as Matt said, one of the things I'm most proud of is that I've been able to get involved and I've been able to do things that matter. In Virginia, what that looked like was, in 2017, we kept our state House and Senate majorities. I was talking to some of you guys earlier about this. We kept our state House and Senate majorities by a literal tie. We had a tie, and they drew a name out of a fishbowl, and the name was a Republican, and that's how we kept our majority. And we kept using the same strategy that won us fewer and fewer seats until 2017 in 2019. And guess what happened? We lost. Because the Republicans were running fewer and fewer candidates, they were contesting fewer and fewer seats, they weren't teaching people how to take ownership of the political process in their area, how to run for office, how to be involved. And when I would travel around Virginia to all these local GOP meetings to talk about the YRs, people would say, why didn't the state party recruit a candidate for my district? And what I said at first, like my knee-jerk reaction is, well, that's your job, why didn't you recruit a candidate? But I realized that that wasn't the right thing to say because no one told them it was their job before they lost. And none of them had ever been told how to recruit candidates or how to vet candidates or that they were even supposed to or could. And actually, our state caucus would call people who wanted to run in hard districts and say, you know what, it's not worth it, we don't want to spend money on you, so you probably shouldn't run. So in 2021, we were gearing up for a governor's race, which thankfully we won, and we were also gearing up for state house elections. And the same pattern was starting all over again, because the local county parties didn't know they were supposed to recruit candidates, and they didn't know how. And our state leadership wasn't going to do anything about that, and our caucus wasn't going to do anything about that. And so I got together with a group of a couple activists, and I said, okay, everybody wants candidates, and we had 100 seats up. Everybody wants 100 candidates for 100 districts. Democrats usually out-recruit us, and we usually lose seats because of it. Let's go find 100 candidates. And so we did. We went out and found people, but not only did we find people, we set up Zoom meetings with prospective candidates and with local GOP leadership and with local stakeholders and activists and people who had a good reputation in the party in those areas, people who knew the districts really well. And we basically gave them a download for like 2 hours for each of these districts, and we were like, this is what the district is, this is what you need to do to file. We can give you a list of a couple people who have been involved here, who might endorse you or donate to your campaign. Here's a couple consultants who are willing to give you some free services or help you out at a very discounted rate, whatever. If you want to file and you want to be our candidate, follow these couple steps, do this homework, come back to us and let us know. And most of them did. And we recruited 100 candidates for 100 seats. And this is the first time either party had done that since we started keeping track in 1995. And guess what? We won. We won our state house majority by 2 seats. And those 2 seats were seats that I got told, we're never going to win, don't bother recruiting a candidate. We won. We wouldn't have our majority if we hadn't run candidates everywhere. But what's most exciting to me is that our next batch of state house and senate elections are in 2023. And I don't have to be the one blowing that horn anymore, because I've already seen party leaders, local leaders, activists in our toughest areas putting the call out publicly and saying, we have these seats to fill, they're really hard. If you want to run, here's the process. They've already set up vetting panels, they've already set up training programs. I don't need to recruit 100 candidates for 100 seats next year, because they're already being recruited by people who learned how to do it. And to me, that's why I care about party building. Not because I want to get credit for any of these things, but because I want to do something that matters, and what matters to me is something that is scalable, that other people can put into practice, and take far beyond what I could ever do myself. And so, the YRs taught me how to do that. It gave me the opportunity to do that. It gave me a seat at the table to do that. And for every one of me that finds that door in, there's like at least 10 that don't. At least 10 people who care and who are passionate and are willing to show up. and no one explains to them how to be involved. No one creates an atmosphere to teach them how to do these things. And so what I care most about is going out and finding those other 9 or 10 people and getting them involved. And for me, I feel like the best way that I've been able to do that is through the Young Republicans. So that's really what I care about, finding good people and putting them to work in the right places that they're talented at. Some people are really cut out to run for elected office, and that's fantastic. Some people are really good party leaders, and that's great. Some people are really good at media. Some people are policy wonks, and that's what they want to do all day long. We need everyone. We need to recapture our institutions, and in order to do that, we don't just need congressmen, we need everybody. So one of the main things, and the reason that I'm running, to be honest, is state focus. So about a year ago, we had a quarterly meeting in Arkansas, and one of the things that came before the National Committee was a proposal for about 27 requirements that state chapters had to do, and if they didn't do them, they would be put on probationary status, which isn't really a term that exists in our value. Nobody knew what that meant. And so, before this happened, I was talking to different state leaders from around the country, and they were like, yeah, we don't have bandwidth to do this. Or like, if I did X, Y, or Z, my chapters would call me up on the phone and yell at me. Like, this doesn't work here. And I understand that problem because Virginia is like 4 different states in one. We have very different regions in Virginia. They have very different needs. Our clubs, we have clubs chartered in all those areas, but they function differently, and they need different things. Their meetings are structured a little bit differently, and their goals are different. So I was talking to state leaders from across the country. They were like, yeah, a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't work for us. It's a great thing to aspire to do all these things, but we need a national federation that actually wants to hear what our state needs to win and move the ball forward. So the proposal got put forward, and I stood up and I offered an amendment that stripped out the probationary status language. So it was just best practices guideline, and that's fine, that's great. And I didn't really think anything of it. I just knew that it was the right thing to do because of the feedback that I had heard from my fellow state chairs and fellow members of the National Committee. And so afterwards, I had a couple people come up to me and they said, would you consider running for national chair? No. I never had a particular desire to run for national chair. So I told them, go find 10 more people who feel like you do, have them tell me that, and maybe I will think about it. And they did. So I thought about it. And my husband Jack and I prayed about it for a couple months. He's been involved in the Young Republicans for a long time and has seen contested elections in the past, has been part of those things. So he's like, all right, if you think that you need to do this, here's a list of things to check off. Okay? So I checked those things off, and I got a really surprising reception. So there's a lot of people around the country who feel like the current National Federation does not care about what their states need, and barely listens when they raise their hand and say, hey, could you do this? Or hey, this is the district we really need to win. Or hey, this is our metric for success here. And that's different everywhere. So that's what my campaign has been focused on. Because ultimately, like I said, I believe that the local level is the most impactful. This is where all the connections are made. This is where you are directly talking to voters, directly talking about your principles, directly winning people over. The state federation is here to support the clubs. My role as state chair in Virginia is to support my clubs and to give them the tools and the resources that they need to be successful, to help back them up when they need it, to give them the firepower and the resources and deployments when they need it. And to me, the National Federation is more of that. We are the support structure for the states and the local level. What we should be doing is creating resources, whether that's training or data or ways to recruit members or partnerships or leadership development opportunities, whatever that may be, the National Federation's job is to make the state stronger and to make the local clubs stronger. So like one of the things that, if you can go to our website, YRNFSN.com, we've got all kinds of stuff up there, plans, and we'll put more out. But one of the things that we've talked about, and I've talked with someone who's going to be my comms director if I get elected, is the possibility to create a surrogacy network around the country. So, like, it's fine. If I get elected national chair, Fox News is like, all right, what do young conservatives think about X, Y, or Z? It's fine if I get up there and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what young conservatives think, blah, 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 blah. Most of the people in your states are never going to meet me. And quite honestly, probably don't care what I have to say. But they do care about what you have to say. But a lot of people who would be best able to articulate that around the country in their own states and their own communities don't really have the media training to do that, and might not feel comfortable doing that. So one of the things that the YRNF can provide at a really scalable level for all of the states is media and surrogacy training. So that if somebody comes to us and say, hey, we want a young Republican to talk about gun rights. Okay, we've got a list of people. Where do you want somebody to talk about gun rights? All of these people, they know what they're doing. We have a group of people in our network that are young Republicans that we trust, that have been trained. They can get up there and tell you what their opinion is on gun rights in Texas. That's a lot more powerful than me sharing a completely disconnected perspective of what gun rights in Texas means. So that's one of the things that we can do as a national federation. And there's other opportunities, like I mentioned regional vice chairs earlier. Each of our 4 regions has a regional council. Those regional councils meet semi-regularly to go over deployments and different stuff like that. But generally speaking, at the national level, we have like deployments, or we have quarterly meetings. Once a year, we either have a convention or we have a leadership summit. There's not a lot of opportunity outside of that if you're just a member, or even if you're a state leader who's not on the national committee, to interact with your fellow young conservatives around the country, unless you really go out of your way and seek out that opportunity. So one of the things that we'd like to do is use our regional councils to do more region-based issues, more region-based trainings, more region-based events, opportunities for you to network with people in other states who might be helpful in your fights that you're having here, places where we can share ideas. We have a lot of young Republicans who are elected to various levels of office, and there's some great organizations out there that offer mentorship to young candidates and young elected officials. It would be a great opportunity for us to step in that void as well and say, if you need mentors, if you have young conservative candidates in your state that are running for office, we have a network of mentors across the country who can talk to them about their experience. These are all really basic things that can be tools in a toolkit. Not every state needs to use these things, but each state is going to have a certain amount of goals. The National Federation's job is basically to provide you with a toolbox, and your state can pick out of that what you need and create a stronger organization. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is leadership development. That's something that I've worked really hard on in Virginia, because even before I decided I was going to run for national chair, I did not plan to seek a second term as Virginia YR chair, because Virginia's been very successful with one-term chairman, and Virginia's a little bit of a political meat grinder, so it's not very fun to be YR chairman in Virginia for more than 2 years. It's not fun to be chairman for 2 years, but one of the things that was important to me early on was to identify the next generation after me. But not only the next generation after me, at the time we didn't know if we were going to have a Republican governor, but we had an election coming up. So it was really important to me that we found young Republicans who were able to staff that administration. We found people who we trusted, who we could talk to, and if something came up in the governor's office or the attorney general's office or the lieutenant governor's office or the legislature, we had a network of people we could talk to. And so we did that. A lot of our members now staff the admin, which is great. And in 2024, we're going to have an opportunity to recapture the White House. And God willing, we'll be able to do that. When I talk to alumni of this organization, one of the things that has consistently interested me is the fact that if you talk to any of them, We find out they were a young Republican. Some of their proudest moments and their most formative years were in this organization. There's actually a senior status federal judge who lives up near Jack and I in Northern Virginia. And we met him at like a conservative event. We were talking to him, he found out we were involved in the Young Republicans. He was like, I was involved in the Young Republicans. That's how I became a judge. And he was talking to us about the fact he was involved during the Reagan Revolution days. He was a teenage Republican, and then he was a CR, and then he was YR. He was a lawyer for the Reagan campaign. And he was talking about how he just learned how to do what he did, and then an opportunity came up for a judgeship. And somebody, they were throwing around names, and somebody was like, well, this guy, he's a great guy. We've worked with him before. We trust him. We know. It's like a background check, the Young Republicans. Because you work with all these people in the trenches, it's a background check. So they were like, all right, we know this guy is solid. Put his name up. So he got called into the White House, and he wound up getting appointed to be a judge. As a judge, he helped write Estonia's constitution after the Soviet Union fell. He would not have wound up in that room without this organization. But this organization, as it stands now, is structured to make pretty fundraising content. That's not unimportant. But the Young Republicans is not about making the RNC feel happy, because they can show a lot of smiling faces at an event, and they can say, we knocked this many doors and it was awesome. No. This organization, not only leaders of the party today, but it is an excellent training ground for the people who will fill our institutions going forward for the next 50 years. But it can only be that if our leadership understands that that's possible. That's what I've tried to do in Virginia. That's what I would like to do at the national level. In 2024, when we elect a Republican, I would like that incoming administration to call us and say, we have these openings to fill, who do you have? And we can send them a list of people who have been vetted, who have done the work, who have the experience, who can fill those positions and make sure that the next chapter in our nation's history is a good one, is a better one. It's one that moves the ball forward. So that's what I'd like to do with this organization, and that's ultimately, elected or not elected, doesn't matter to me. That's what I'm doing with my life. I want to put the right people in the right places. I want to move the ball forward. I hope that you all will join me in doing that. Let's fight, and let's win. Happy to take more questions, to go into anything specific, but that's why I care. I think it's really the only thing that I could be doing with my life.
Do you want your beer?
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay.
I'll take my beer first.
Question.
I was about to drink that. Looks good.
You earned it.
Nuance in the back.
Earlier you referenced like controversy with you being here, or things you've said before, whatever. Like, what are some of those controversies?
Sure. So Matt mentioned earlier that in Virginia we have gotten Young Republicans elected to our Central Committee, and we now have Young Republicans in about 33 to 35% of our seats on Central Committee. Virginia, for a long time, was a gang war between two factions. They were technically the establishment and the anti-establishment, but they didn't argue over policy issues at all. They argued over nomination method. So pretty much nothing that matters to most people, at least not to most voters. And one of the things that we did was when we started running Young Republicans for office, pretty much had like one criteria, which is, do you care about winning? Like winning elections, getting Republicans elected. That's who we ran. And so they didn't care about the things that the party had fought over for the last 30, 40 years. And so when we started making noise there, it was actually during about a 6-month-long fight. Because Virginia, we have open primaries, but our state party gets to pick a nomination method every year. So we can do a convention, we can do a state-run primary, we could make up a nomination method out of thin air. In 2021, we were going to nominate our candidate for governor. We had a 6-month fight because we had COVID restrictions over whether or not we were going to have a primary, a convention, or make up a nomination method. We made one up. It was a really, really long fight. And I called out some of the candidates. I called out some of the corruption in the party at that time. There was a candidate who was trying to unfairly influence the decision of nominating method to benefit them. And I was not quiet about that. And I was not quiet about the fact that this fight was stupid. And that wasn't popular with people who've been around for a really long time and staked their entire political careers in Virginia on fighting this one fight that doesn't matter to anyone outside the party. So that's some controversy that I've been in. I think the other controversy that Matt was referencing was that I am running against someone who was previously state chair of Texas. So, you know, people in Texas might know him. But I have no ill will against my opponent. I just think I have a better vision. That's why I'm here. Yeah.
How do you encourage larger clubs to become more active in campaigns, especially in very blue areas?
Yeah, so that's tough because often when there are Republicans in blue areas, they feel like it's not worth it because they're just going to put somebody else up to lose again. But I think that, you know, when I was talking earlier about victory looking different in different states, it looks different in different localities. So we both live in the 8th district in Virginia, which is about 23% Republican. So victory looks really different for us in the 8th district than it does for other places in Virginia. Victory in the 8th district in Virginia looks like if we can get 30%, we did an amazing job. So I think that setting expectations is a really important part of that, because sometimes the most important thing you can do in a deeply blue area is take the time away from a Democrat incumbent and take their money away. If you put up a serious challenger in one of those districts, odds are that Democrat is going to have to spend a lot more time in that district going to all of the civic league meetings and the whatever school board meetings and different organizations. They wouldn't have to do that if that district wasn't contested. They would be out there in the competitive districts campaigning for the Democrats there. So I think it has to do in those districts with setting goals. If we can grow our percentage by this much this year, that's a win. And, you know, Republicans, I think, generally speaking, and I've talked to a lot of Republicans around the country, we don't like looking 10 years in the future. We like to look at victory as like, we crushed the Democrats this year, it was awesome. It is awesome when we do that, but we really, because our opponents think in 50 and 100-year timescales. We need to think in 50 and 100-year timescales. Democrats didn't take over the Virginia state legislature in 2 years. They took it over in about 15 years because they ran more candidates every single year. They got higher percentages in different districts every year. And they knew if we, you know, eke out more percentages here over time, we can flip these districts, and we did. So we need to be playing that same kind of game, and that comes from running candidates and being engaged at the local level. But we really need to communicate that message to activists at the local level. Because I've talked to a lot of activists in blue areas who are really bummed because they think, like, if we just have a good candidate this year, we'll crush them and we'll win, and people will finally see. It takes more time than that. And it's not fun and it's not easy, but I think Republicans are willing to have a hard fight and willing to take a long time to get there. We just need to communicate that message. Yeah?
What do you think our involvement should be with other Republican clubs like Log Cabin?
So there's a lot of other Republican organizations. Log Cabin is one of them, College Republicans. There's a High School Republican National Federation now. There's a Women's Federation. I think that state by state, it's a little bit different. So in my state, we are really involved with College Republicans, the High School Republicans, and the Women's Federation. We don't really have a strong Log Cabins Federation. We haven't really had one. I kind of tried to start one, it just didn't really work, whatever. I think it's important for each state to do what makes sense for them in terms of building coalitions. One of the things I think we can do at the national level is do a little bit better job engaging with the official auxiliaries of the Republican Party, which are the college Republicans, which is now like 2 different federations, and the Women's Federation, as well as with the RNC. But a lot of that has to do with aligning on issues that we agree on, making it possible for people to join different organizations. So like we just passed a bylaws amendment in Virginia to make it possible for people, especially graduating seniors from the CRs, to join the YRs. Previously, they couldn't be a member of both. So making it possible for cross-pollination between organizations, and then also engaging where we can on issues that we find common ground, to continue to grow our party and to bring people in and get them engaged in electing Republicans. Yeah.
So it's more of a two-part question. So the first part is, you spend all this time, energy, and effort vetting and getting a good Republican to get into office.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of groups, like some of the Federation for Women, as well as the GOP and even some of the RNCs. They're not going to get into that arena necessarily of vetting candidates, getting their name behind them, and saying, yes, we endorse this candidate. So the first part is, as YRNF, are you looking to do that as well? Are you going to back those candidates and vet them and put the name of YRNF behind it? And then the second part is, if they turn out to be the only part of them that's a Republican is the R behind their name, how are you going to address that?
So YRNF at the national level, let me back up a little bit. Republicans in general tend not to like it when national Republican figures put a hand on the scale in a race in their hometown. I don't think it's appropriate for the National Federation to be playing in states' primary elections. Now, different states have different rules on whether or not their federations can endorse, whether or not their officers can endorse. For instance, I know Texas can endorse candidates in primaries, Virginia State Federation cannot. Our local clubs can, and our officers can endorse in their personal capacities, and that's at their discretion. But that depends on the state and whether or not that's necessary. States have updated their bylaws accordingly. For instance, as national chair, I don't think it's my place to play in primaries in states. I do think it is the place of the national organization, though, to teach members how to affect their elected officials. If they feel that there's someone that needs to be primaried, they should know how to do that. If they feel that they need to lobby or influence members of their legislature, they should know how to do that. They should be able to have a network of people from that person's district who can be engaged in that. But I also think that part of influencing those elected officials has to do with how they staff their offices and who they're listening to. And we can definitely put young Republicans in places of leadership to do that as well. So my goal from a national perspective is, like I said, to give people the tools that they need to do what's best for their home states, their home districts, not to put a hand on the scale and tell them what they should be doing there. Yeah?
You were talking about developing future leaders and through media connections, media training, things like that.
Yeah.
What other type of leadership training do you think, or strategies do you have for future development?
Sure, yeah, so that's one example. The Young Republican National Federation actually has 16 standing committees right now, and those things cover stuff like legislative affairs. We have an international committee, basically, to engage with foreign policy, different parties from around the world. We have a strategic initiatives committee, communications committee, a resolution committee, all this kind of stuff. Right now, those committees only meet if the chair thinks it's important that they meet, and are pretty much only staffed by members of the national committee or their close friends. That's not really helpful in leadership development, and we are wasting a massive opportunity. For instance, the International Committee is a great example of that. We really need Republicans who can, if we win in 2024, who can go into the national security apparatus, the foreign policy apparatus in this country, and provide a conservative voice there. we have a committee that provides us with an opportunity to train those people now, so that they have experience doing those things, so that they know how to publish a policy piece, for instance, on foreign policy, or have the experience of going overseas and observing an election. By the way, that used to be a thing that the International Committee did. We used to have a chair of the International Committee about, 6 years ago? Less than that. That would regularly get up at meetings and say, I have X number of opportunities to go observe elections in, say, Mozambique. We will take anybody, they'll pay for your flights to go over there, they'll pay for your lodging while you're there. We just need people in the US who can go observe this election. And that was open to everybody in the Young Republicans. And people did it. And that is excellent experience. A lot of people who did those type of things went on to have careers in that sector because of the experience they were able to build here. So those are opportunities that we can bring back to make sure that members of our federation are really interested in policy and want to write policy pieces on China and Taiwan. We can do that. We can put them in contact with people who do that. Or we can put together a list of partner organizations that align with our values and say, if you want to have a fellowship, here's a list of places that are accepting, we'll give you a recommendation. Right? So there's lots of opportunities both within our organization and partnering with similar aligned organizations to make sure that our members are trained to do whatever they want to do within the movement. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, so the Texas Young Republican Federation in recent years have had some very good ideas and initiatives that they've launched and executed on, things that I think would be great to roll out to other states.
Yeah.
Whether they're training initiatives or whether they're processes for interviewing YRs who are running for office or deployments, the way they do things.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of us who have been, who are in YR, who have been involved for several months, have heard of YRNF.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes, I think, some involvement at the local level, at the state level, before you finally realize, okay, the YRNF exists. What do they do?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you want to bring the states, you want to put the emphasis on the states.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you a sort of a specific process question. So if a state did have a good initiative, a good program, whatever it is, sorry to be generic, what would you do as president of the YRNF to make that initiative, make other states aware of that initiative, and how to possibly roll it out to those states?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do that. So I mentioned the regional councils earlier, and I also mentioned the State Chairman's Association chairman position. Right now, the regional councils kind of just meet very, very loosely, not super regularly, and get told stuff that's going on in the region, and then everybody goes home. Our regional councils are actually a really, really great opportunity for people to, for instance, like if you guys were doing something great in Texas that you wanted to talk about, you could contact the Southern Regional Vice Chair and say, hey, we're doing this really cool thing. I would like 5 minutes at the next regional council meeting to talk about what we're doing, how it works, what the results are, and explain it to other states. That's a really great opportunity that we can do through the regional councils. It's also a great thing that we can do through the State Chairman's Association nationally, which is it's basically an advisory body to the National Committee comprised of all state chairs. Same thing. Talk to the SCA chairman, hey, we have this great initiative that we're doing in Texas. We want, X number of minutes to present this to the SCA. Present it to the SCA, it goes great. Maybe the SCA says, hey, can you present this to the National Committee? Can you give us a little presentation on this or whatever? So that's a great way that we can respond to feedback from the states and actually platform them to talk about these things and talk to other states and share their experience instead of just saying, hey, this is the initiative that the National Federation is doing. Check this box, sign up, great, see you later. So yeah, that's what I would like to bring in. It's honestly really simple to do that. The other thing is making sure that our standing committees meet regularly. So a lot of our standing committees offer ways for us to propose things and put them forward to create actual deliverables for the organization. So for instance, the Strategic Initiative Committee that we have, that committee is responsible for creating a strategic plan every certain amount of years. But outside of that, they can do other work to talk about structuring the organization in a way that makes sense, updating our processes and things like that. For instance, if you guys had a really good way of tracking membership in Texas, that's something that you could present through a committee as well if they were meeting regularly at quarterly meetings in a public forum where people could participate. And it's an easy way that you could say, hey, we're doing this, let me talk to you about this, see if this works either at the national level or as a recommendation to states. So there's a lot of processes in place, we just have to use the structure that we have instead of just like wasting potential left, right, and center. Yeah?
What are the substantive differences in approach between you and your opponent?
Well, start with the one that I think is most apparent. You can go to YRNFascend.com right now, and you can look at very specific plans that I have for the future of the National Federation that I have created and talked about based on my conversations with state leaders and local leaders across the country. My opponent does not have a website with similar platform points that you could go look at. He has a couple posts on Instagram about who's on his team. I think that is the biggest contrast between us. I want you to know what I'm going to do. I want you to have input into that. My opponent might, but I don't know.
Do you know what his points are? So
None of them are
so
released yet.
You can't answer the question because you don't know what his points are.
Yeah, he hasn't released any.
That's great.
He's running because he's the current co-chair. So I wish I could tell you more, but
That's great.
maybe I'll have to ask him.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it possible to change, like, you said that you see us, we need to be visionary, like,
Yeah.
looking in like 50 years, not 1 year, like we want, how could we do that? Like plan for 50 years? Like,
Study history. Read a lot.
yeah, but organizing.
Organizing, yeah, again, it starts with studying where we have been and where we can be. So one of the things that, I love reading about the history of our founder. One of the things that sticks out to me, especially as I read the personal letters that our founders sent to each other, is that they're not demigods, they are just people, just like us. They rose to the occasion of their time, and they tried to think as far ahead as they could, based on the information that they had and based on a deep understanding of where they came from. So really, the best thing that we can do is understand where we came from, how we got here, and have a clear idea, gotta think about it for a long time, of where we want to be. So, yeah, my husband Jack has a point here.
I would like to point out that the first Republican president to deny Democrats universal health care coverage is Teddy Roosevelt. But they never stopped asking, ever. And they got what they got through on Obamacare, but that's what she's talking about, right? When they have a priority, they will take it through generations and never stop.
So, Virginia, our governor's election, parents' rights was a huge issue, really a very decisive issue in the election. Imagine if you started a campaign on parents having the ultimate authority on what is taught to their children and how, right now in your county, and you transmitted to everyone after you for the next 50 years that this is a bright line that we will not allow anyone to cross. Considering that and setting that up and transmitting that to the people that come after you is very important, because often Republicans are really reactive. So like we want to react to stuff. We want to, like the left is like, we want to do X, Y, Z. We're like, no. One of the most important things that we can transmit is what the bright lines are. Because if we don't transmit those, then the left will say, well, we just want a little bit here. We're like, well, it doesn't sound too bad, okay. And they're like, okay, we just want a little bit more here. Oh, okay, that doesn't sound too bad. But really looking at what our bright lines are in the sand and making sure that everybody knows that after us is one of the most powerful things that we on the right can do, especially understanding who we kind of are as people. Yeah.
Jessi, I think we need to wrap things
Sure,
up here.
yeah.
But are y'all gonna stick around after for any?
We'll stick around. Yeah, happy to stick around.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much to everybody
Yep.
who came out
Thank
tonight.
you all.
Jessi, Jack, thank you so much. Just one last announcement. So Rockwall YR are meeting in December. We're going to do a hybrid between a regular meeting and a book club meeting. Tony Arterburn is coming back out. He was our first speaker. He runs a podcast called the Tony Arterburn radio transmission, and he will be joining us. He'll give a 30-minute speech, and then we'll go into the book. And we meet at Chandler's Landing, and that'll be on December 29th. So check out our website for more information about that. It's always a good time, and hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Woo!